Well, I see it is noon, so I think we can go ahead and get started. Just a couple things before I turn the floor over to Mike. I am Marissa. I'm the marketing and events coordinator for the museum. So thank you everyone for joining in and listening to Mike's talk today about Turkeyfoot rock. Just want to again thank our sponsors of the virtual history series. Edwin and Irma Wolf and Lynn and Betty Wineland, as well as all of the T-card holders from our T-Series event. And with that, I will turn the floor over to Mike.
All right, let me start sharing the screen. I have quite a bit on my screen. Let me see if I can, there we go. All right, let me, whoop. All right, let me, well, let me see, where is that? All right, can everyone see the Wood County Museum? I hope so. Whoops. Here is a picture of me trying to find the origin of Turkeyfoot rock. And no, I am not crazy. Those are the people who have influenced the legend of Turkeyfoot rock. And I'm wearing the same shirt as I am today. No, this talk is not about the movement of the rock between Maumee and Toledo, the lighthearted and anecdotal talk of Maumee and Toledo taking the rock back and forth. This is something a little bit different. That talk has been given many times. Now, here is a book, perhaps you have seen it, Lies My Teacher Told Me, about American history. Today, it is in vogue to point out historical errors. Now, here is, being a good local historian, I often read other historical society publications. And this one is a series called Myths and Lies and History. Myth number 2, the Great Chief Turkeyfoot. This is from March of 2019, and this writer writes, during the Battle of Fallen Timbers, along the old Indian Trail, the great Indian chief Turkeyfoot stood upon a rock to rally his troops. He was shot dead. The legend of this article, published many times. It is a great story, and the origin is unknown. But I asked myself, it does make a great story. The origin is known, but is it really unknown, though? We will get to the bottom of some of the origin. This program is called The Misorigin of Historical Tradition, Part 3. There is Turkeyfoot rock, and this talk is Turkeyfoot rock, does it matter? And that title of Does It Matter comes to us at the very end from a late James Murphy, a historian studying the rock. Now, of course, we must talk about the beginning. The Battle of Fallen Timbers was fought on August 20th, 1794. We know that General Anthony Wayne had defeated the Native Americans, primarily led by Chief Little Turtle. At the Battle of Fallen Timbers monument, it goes on to street according to tradition. Chief Turkeyfoot, who was in Ottawa, rallied his warriors. Here he was killed. And many years, tribesmen made offerings of tobacco to appease the Great Spirit. When I was a little kid, my parents took me to this monument. My father said, here is where Chief Turkeyfoot was, there is where he was killed. We looked on the rock for holes that might have been bullet holes. Now, the very first account of the rock that I know of came from the Reverend Cutting Moody Marsh. He was born in 1800. In 1873, he died. In November of 1829, Marsh was forced to winter over. It became too icy in Detroit to take him to Wisconsin. He decided that during that time, he would come down from Detroit to the Maumee River Valley and do his missionary work among the Ottawa. And he writes that on February 14th, 1830, in his journal, there is a large foot at the foot, or large stone at the foot of Presque Isle Hill. That's the hill behind the monument, having the print of a turkey, rabbits, and also a horse's foot on it. He does not describe this rock as just having Chief Turkeyfoot's mark, but also rabbits and horses that have never, to the best of my knowledge, come up in any other retelling of the legend. He writes in his journal in 1830, on this rock, the Indians imagined some spirit who was angry with them. That spirit came and stood during the battle in the form of a turkey. Accordingly, almost to the present time of 1830, they offer sacrifices of whiskey and tobacco on the rock whenever they pass it. In 1830, when Reverend Marsh writes this in his journal, there would have been many Ottawa left in the Maumee Valley. Reverend Marsh writes this about 36 years after the battle. According to Marsh's 1830 account, and there is the single most important asterisk in this talk, we do not know if an earlier account of 1830 exists. I do not. Many local historians, to the best of my knowledge, do not know if there is an earlier account of this. It is also interesting to note in 1830, he does not mention a Chief Turkeyfoot, the spirit of a Turkeyfoot, but he mentions a tobacco shrine legend. Now, was this spirit of a turkey Marsh's own speculation? Did someone take the Reverend in 1830 to go look at the rock? Did that person tell him the story of the turkey spirit? Did Marsh see the stone? Perhaps did he see other animal prints? We will never know. It is extremely important to remember that Reverend Marsh's journal was not accessible to any other reteller of this story until about 1900 in Wisconsin in a book, not online, not searchable, but was Marsh accessible. Their arrow is going to Peter Navarre, a person that we might know. Did these two know each other? Did Navarre himself take them there? Navarre's account of the legend of Turkeyfoot Rock is different in just about every way from Reverend Cutting Marsh. Now, who do I believe gives the biggest start to the Turkeyfoot legend as we know it, but Andrew Count Coffinberry. He arrives in the Maumee River Valley, Maumee, generally in about 1836, which is about 42 years after the battle, 6 years after Reverend Marsh leaves. They do not know each other. Howe Coffinberry in 1842 writes a poem, The Forest Ranger, a poetic tale of the Western wilderness of 1794. It is about the Battle of Fallen Timbers. It includes Turkeyfoot Rock. This was written about 48 years after the battle. And Coffinberry writes, yet at the foot of Red Presque Isle the hill, brave Misasa was warring still. He stood upon a large rough stone, still dealing random blows alone. But bleeding fast glazed were his eyes, and feeble grew his battle cries. And he dies upon this rock. He mentions a chief named Misasa, Turkeyfoot. Now, Coffinberry continues that this was a shrine to the Native Americans who, as devotional acts, placed tobacco there. Coffinberry acknowledges that when he began to write his poem, that he had been deceived and embraced the error of Chief Turkeyfoot, that he had actually existed. But he had been undeceived by his friend, Judge Jerome, who confirmed there was a Chief Turkeyfoot. Who was Judge Jonathan Jerome? He arrived in Maumee, in the Maumee River Valley in 1827, about 33 years after the battle, 3 years before Reverend Marsh. Jonathan Jerome tells Count Coffinberry there was a Chief Turkeyfoot, and the legend and perhaps his name as Misasa. Now, Coffinberry's acknowledgement that he had embraced the common error of his day, it strongly implies that even in 1842, there was skepticism about the origins of the legend of the rock. Had a Chief Turkeyfoot existed? Had he actually been killed on that rock? He strongly implies even at that time, there was debate about whether the history of the rock was true. Now, Coffinberry's Forest Ranger was written in 1840 with the vernacular of the day, pale-face, heathen, great spirit, sachem, squaw. Those are words that writers of his day, American writers, used as the language of the Native Americans. None of those words, I believe, personally, were actually Ottawa terms. On the left is Peter Navarre. Right at his foot is Dresden Howard, another person extremely important in starting this legend. Now, let us go into the professional historical age. Benson Losing traveled across the United States. In 1868, he wrote the pictorial field guide of the War of 1812. Even though this is about the War of 1812, he covers extensively Anthony Wayne. Benson Losing was a historian ahead of his time. He interviewed participants of the battle or their descendants, people who were actually in the War of 1812. This was written, his history, 74 years after the battle. But Benson Losing did not just wander around the Maumee River Valley alone and confused. he had a guide, two guides. Judge Hezekiah Lord Hosmer was active in Maumee at this time. He was a guide in 1868. If you were a judge at this time, you were expected to write a history book. And he wrote the early history of the Maumee Valley in 1858. His book doesn't mention the rock, but an awful lot about Peter Navarre, who also was Benson Losing's guide. So Hosmer, Navarre, take him to the rock, Turkeyfoot Rock. He was also alive during the Battle of Fallen Timbers, but Navarre was 10 years old, living in Detroit at the time of the battle. Now, during Benson Losing's right, he writes that among the brave warriors in the battle was McMaster, or Turkeyfoot, an Ottawa chief. He was greatly beloved by his people. He leapt upon a small boulder. He almost immediately fell pierced by a musket ball and expired by the side of the rock. So he is also using McMaster as Count Coffinberry almost 20 years earlier. Now, here's also telling. He said in his history of the rock, Peter Navarre told me that the Ottawa gather around that rock, place bits of dried beef, parched peas and corn, and sometimes cheap trinkets upon it. Remember the word trinkets. When Peter Navarre is telling Benson Losing this, in 1868, the Ottawa had been removed from the Maumee River Valley for just over 30 years. Benson Losing did not see this occur. Now, Losing perpetuates the shrine legend as Count Coffinberry says it was a shrine. He also uses Count Coffinberry's McMaster. He does not mention Marsh's carvings of a rabbit foot and a horse's hoof. He had no access to Reverend Marsh's journal at this time, but he did have access to the Coffinberry book, I am sure. He uses some of the things as Coffinberry, nothing of Reverend Marsh's description. Now we will go into the historical, professional historian period. There was a historian, Henry Howe. He tours Ohio, publishes historical collections of Ohio, volumes 1 through 3. When he publishes the volume that occurs with the Battle of Fallen Timbers, it is 94 years after the battle. And although Henry Howe is a supposed professional historian, when it comes time to write the account of Turkeyfoot Rock, he almost quotes word for word the Coffinberry poem as his source. Now, one of the single most important persons to acknowledge this legend is Dresden Howard. He came to where Fort Meigs was as a boy. He attended the Indian Mission School. He could speak the Ottawa language. He went to their school. His father knew the Ottawa. He and his father moved to where Grand Rapids is today. He states that Turkeyfoot, and there's a slight variation, in it, was a noted Ottawa chief. Turkeyfoot was buried near the rock from which he harangued his braves. When he wrote this in 1888 in a letter that was 94 years after the battle and probably 75 years after he last spoke Ottawa language. Who wrote this story? Clark Waggoner. He was a newspaper man and a tax collector in Toledo. If you were a newspaper man, you were expected to write a history book. This letter and this account come from the history of Toledo and Lucas County. Dresden Howard, throughout his life, affirms that the true Turkeyfoot story came from the Ottawa chief Kinjoino, who was an actual participant in the battle. This Ottawa chief actually was in the battle and saw it occur. Now, when Chief Kinjoino died, Dresden Howard would have been 12 years old. He was welcome in the homes of the Ottawa. I'm sure he listened to Kinjoino's stories that he told. And he writes again in 1893 that in my time, Dresden Howard's time, Potawatomi characters was written that Turkeyfoot had died there. Howard wrote this 75 years after Kinjoino had died. He was a kid of about 12, and 99 years after the battle. Also, when Dresden Howard writes the story Kinjoino tells to him, he writes that Kinjoino uses the word pale faces, long knives, great spirit, and great father, which are suspect words that oftentimes in the 1890s and after the turn of the century, American writers were using as Native American dialogue. So we do have to take that into consideration. Now, who does Dresden Howard have in common? On the right is Reverend Marsh. Dresden Howard would have been about 13 years old. He probably did not show up on Reverend Marsh's radar. Perhaps Dresden Howard's father did. Who also might have? Peter Navarre. He was 45 years old. We do know for a fact that Dresden Howard as a young man and Peter Navarre as a slightly older young man did meet and share stories. We do know that. Now, the amateur historian time period, there's Charles Evers, there's Judge Killitz. They almost exclusively rely on Dresden Howard's writings, which he continuously affirms he gets from Peter Navarre, he gets from Kinjoino, an actual participant. They also use Henry Howe's account, which is basically a word-for-word retelling of the Coffinberry poem. We'll skip this. Now, let us go to 1952. We are in the professional historian time period again. Here is the Northwest Ohio Quarterly, Volume 4. This was written 158 years after the battle. The writer of this says the members of the Historical Society in Ohio were pleased to know that Turkeyfoot Rock is an active shrine. I am told every year Indian visitors from across America stop at the rock to see the memorial. Ever since the famous battle, no year has elapsed without many such visits of the Native Americans. We of the white race should never forget what Turkeyfoot Rock means to the red men. This is basically saying the Historical Society knows the legend of Turkeyfoot Rock, and we must remind the Native Americans of why this is important to them. Now, in this Northwest Ohio Quarterly, they quote Reverend Marsh's account. By this time, it is accessible to these Northwest Ohio Quarterly historians. They write, in the midst of the battle, the turkey god appeared. They also use Dresden Howard's account of the legend of Turkeyfoot Rock, who he continuously affirms came from Chief Conjoino, Colonel Nags of Waterville, Peter Navarre, Peter Menor, people who had lived with the Ottawa. He lived with the Ottawa. He always is confirming this. They also talk about experts of Native Americans. One of the experts that they mention is Carl Purchart of the Detroit Aborigine Society. I can find nothing about this society. It may be out there. What was he an expert in? He must have had a large prehistoric collection of artifacts, because they are still being sold from the Carl Purchart collection. These were prehistoric. Where did he get his expertise from? That amateur historians that quote the Coffinberry poem, Dresden Howard. Now, Misasa, who names Turkeyfoot as Misasa? 1842, Coffinberry, 1868, Losing, also Dresden Howard. Losing and Dresden Howard have one person in common, and that is Peter Navarre. Could this portion of the legend have come from Navarre? Peter Navarre was at least alive during the Battle of Fallen Timbers, albeit a boy in Detroit. He knew Conjoino. He would have been a young man when Conjoino was alive. Dresden Howard was a boy when Conjoino was alive, but Dresden Howard knew Navarre later in life. Count Coffinberry of the poem was active in this time period. Could he have known Navarre? Coffinberry was from Maumee. Navarre at this time was coming and going from Maumee. Perhaps. He was also Benson Losing's guide. Now, Hosmer, who was also Benson Losing's guide, knew and wrote flatteringly about Navarre, but he does not mention the rock. He writes mainly about Navarre's exploits. And there's that asterisk. Please take this into consideration. The oldest known account, Reverend Marsh, he mentions no chief, Turkeyfoot, but many other carvings. Myths. Now we get back to the beginning of March of 2019. Myth, lies, and histories. Myth 2. Finally, folks who are experts 225 years after that, say that Indians did not name their sons after body parts. There never would have been an Indian chief named Turkeyfoot, and the whole story is a fabrication, a myth, a lie. Now, talking to folks who are experts in whatever it is they're experts in, saying is not the best historical research because the experts who say they did not name their sons after body parts never met the parents of Chief Blackhoof, who was an actual participant in the Battle of Fallen Timbers. Blackhoof also might have been in the Maumee River Valley, perhaps when Peter Navarre was there. So the experts, had they consulted the parents of Blackhoofs, might have changed their story. Now, here is a Toledo Blade. Native Americans recall combatants at Fallen Timbers, but I have been bringing this up. How much can you really recall 227 years after the battle? These Native American experts, just like other people, are relying on, there's Nevin Winter, there's Judge Killitz, the amateur historians who quote word for word Henry Howe at the top, who quotes word for word the Coffinberry poem, and Dresden Howard could be a more reliable source, however. This is interesting. The Ohio History Central website, where students and teachers look things up, state that locals routinely found offerings such as beef, corn, there's that word, trinkets on the border. This is part of what Navarre told Losing in 1868. They both used the word trinkets. Now, if we have time, we'll continue. The Flip Side of Turkeyfoot Rock was written by James Murphy. It was not a lighthearted, humorous tale of the stolen rock from Toledo and Maumee. It was about that rock, as it appears today, is upside down. He proves a very strong case, and when going to the parks was met with, and the State Historical Site, apathy, indifference, and unhelpfulness. In Murphy's book, he quotes the application for historical status. The historian who goes to Turkeyfoot Rock writes, "It is more likely that this is a tourist placed the symbol on the rock during the time it was located on the banks of the Maumee River." He also acknowledges, and so do many other people, that Turkeyfoot has been touched up many times with metal tools over the year. What is it a shrine to today but graffiti? The rock is absolutely covered in initials, in pentagrams, other various pieces of graffiti. That is what it is a shrine to today. The monument to Fallen Timbers, built many years ago in the 1930s, I believe. Notice Anthony Wayne, tall and proud, the pioneer on his left, upright and proud. Notice the Native American beside him. Perhaps that's representing Chief Little Turtle, also proud and upright. On the actual monument, there is the words, "To Chief Little Turtle and his brave Indian wars." They acknowledge the bravery and leadership of Chief Little Turtle. On the left there is the State Historical, Archaeological and Historical Society places in 1935 names of people who were killed in the service of Anthony Wayne. In 1994, the Fallen Timbers Commemoration Committee and the American Intertribal Association list the tribes who fought there. Now, it is easy for us, and the man who wrote the Myths and Lies of Turkeyfoot history, to dismiss the Turkeyfoot Rock story on the basis that everyone who came before us is both ignorant and wrong. However, Dresden Howard could speak the Ottawa language, and he spoke to participants of the 1794 battle. We have not. The article of Myths and Lies has not either. Take that with a grain of salt. Oh, that is the last slide. I will stop sharing my screen right now. And whoever can take over, there we go.
Well, thank you, Mike. And thanks for everyone who joined us today. If you happen to come in late or missed a part of it, this will be up on North Baltimore Public Library's YouTube page later. And once it goes up, I will share a link on our Facebook page as well, and also send that out in our weekly MailChimp emails next week. Like again, thank you. And if you are interested in any of our other programs, make sure to check out the Wood County Museum Facebook page and website. And we hope that you join us again next month when one of our board members, Scott Gross, presents again for September's virtual history series.
And like I said, I'd like to thank the audience, the Wolves and the Winelands, the tea card holders for making this possible. Like I said, I hope I did not bore anybody, but there is some of the origin. So I am going to, oh, and I have this is the first time I've known how to do this. Some kudos on the right, things to think about when we look at history. I'm going to leave this right now at the North Baltimore Library.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see you. Bye.